Hello and welcome to Libero. I'm Rory Smith from The Observer and Men in Blazers, I have to point that out as well. And I'm joined today by James Horncastle of The Athletic and John Brewin of various places. John, you're a man with your own empire. I think that's probably fair to say, isn't it?
The Guardian mostly, Straits Times, etc., etc.
We're going to start, as we do at the moment, by asking you if you could find it in your hearts to help this scrappy little underdog podcast out by offering a review, a rating. Both have to be positive. It really doesn't work if you're negative about us. Likes on YouTube, comments on Spotify. If you can tell people that you think what we're doing is worthwhile, it does really help us in our algorithm-driven world, and we do really appreciate it. We like talking to each other. We're delighted that so many of you like listening to us, and we'd like to be able to do it for as long as possible. As I say, I'm joined by James Horncastle and John Brewin today, but we also have a little special excerpt from what I think can be described as our Bilbao bureau. Three of our number, Jonathan Wilson, Miguel Delaney and Jack Pitt-Brooke, were all in the stadium in San Mamés to watch what I think we'd all describe as the greatest European final of all time. And very kindly, they sent us a little dispatch. It sounds like pretty soon after the final whistle. Expect music in the background, expect to learn why Jonathan Wilson is not a podcast producer, and expect insight as we listen to their immediate reflections on that game.
So we're in the stadium in Bilbao, just after Tottenham have beaten Manchester United 1-0 to win the Europa League. The players down the pitch with the families, with coaching staff. The fans at one end of the ground are all still there. A huge white bank. The rest of the stadium is pretty much empty. It's still very loud. Jack, did you ever think you'd see the day?
No, I didn't. I'd been wondering what exactly it would look like seeing Tottenham win a trophy. And now I finally have. I mean, I think it was a terrible game, obviously, but I think it was also in keeping with how Ange has approached the last few rounds of this competition, where he's basically abandoned all his, the old way of playing, like Prospero breaking his star, and taken up. He's convinced Tottenham to become a completely different team.
I mean, that is the bizarre thing, isn't it? That they completed 115 passes in 99 minutes of football, so they completed one pass every 52 seconds. This is the team of Bill Nicholson, of Arthur Rowe, of Push and Run. This is the team of Ange Postecoglou, and yet it's like he found one of Jose Mourinho's blueprints lying around the drawer and thought, you know what, mate, that might work.
Yeah, I think that's the fascinating thing about the final. And also, look, arguably the bigger story now is what's going to happen to Manchester United and what decision they need to make. That is very much is it. Like, I mean, in October, Amorim would have been considered, especially given Spurs' form at the time, Amorim would have been considered the better coach with the brighter future. Instead, he's kind of muddled through the season with a system that has never fully worked. There's this argument about it got here playing teams at much less than their budget. And Postecoglou, who had been presented as an even more naive ideologue, maybe not unfairly on his time, he's basically outdone Amorim again by adapting to a European game. As Jack says, I think Tottenham wanted to get away from, I suppose, the short-termism of that kind of Mourinho and then eventually Conte approach. And Postecoglou, to some degree against expectation, has been the one to win a trophy with that.
I think the terrible thing for United now is that it almost can't work for Amorim. He needs so much money to rebuild the squad for his formation, and he's obviously not going to change. And now they don't have the access to that money that can begin that rebuilding. So I think we also said before the final we thought Postecoglou would go come what may, and Amorim would stay come what may. Have we changed our minds at all in the last 2 hours?
Well, I think Postecoglou will go. Amorim, yeah, Miguel's right. It feels to me like he's backed into a position where the only out he has is with hundreds of millions of pounds that don't exist, or 100 million pounds that Man United can't spend. And there is no solution other than money, because he obviously inherited a bad squad, but the way he's trying to make them play, I think, almost makes the squad look worse.
Yeah, exactly. He hasn't been able to do what Ten Hag did. Ten Hag picked the game for a final in the same way Postecoglou was doing and got a result out of it. And United had time and space and money, and money they could spend. You could see now they could persist with Amorim and do what he wants. But the massive issue is the way this season has gone means they don't. As Jack says, they're backed into a corner, and it's almost an equation. Like, it really does come down to the maths. Amorim needs a massive overhaul to make his system work. It looks very unlikely they can do that, and which means, so what's the solution?
And I think the problem though tonight is it almost highlights or confirms what we feared, that the only reason they look good in Europe is because most Premier League teams are better than most other European teams because they have more money. And as soon as they play against a Premier League team who play the Premier League pace, they really struggle. And Bruno Fernandes, having to play deep in midfield to fit the system, had an awful night.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, my mind keeps going back to that interview that Bruno Fernandes did with Owen Hargreaves, where basically he reveals Amorim's shock at just how good Ipswich were. I mean, that, for such a kind of an almost innocuous moment, it's one of those ones that kind of just reveals so much more than intended. And I think it explains a lot from United's struggles to why they're here. And ultimately, as they go up against another Premier League team that has the season they've had, they ultimately fail.
I guess we should end on Tottenham because this is their night. But what a weird night. I mean, if you were a Tottenham fan, would you be rushing out to buy the DVD? I know people don't buy the DVDs, but metaphorically buy the DVD tomorrow? I was sort of thinking kind of, Tottenham always have the big sort of pre-match video montage seems to go on for longer and longer. The idea that culminates with Luke Shaw punching the ball over his own line is...
Or rather, it's a new one now. Are Spurs fans going to come home drunk from a night out and put that on YouTube?
Jack, this is your club. You have the final words.
Funny thing is, I remember the last time that us three would have all done a big European club final in Spain would have been the 2019 Champions League final 6 years ago. I remember we all came away from that game saying, what a terrible game. That was terrible. This game made that game look like the 2022 World Cup final. That game had Van Dijk, it had Kane, it had Alisson, it had Salah, it had Pochettino Spurs, it had Klopp's Liverpool, it had great players, two great managers. This was, I almost can't believe I was watching a European final. I know that finals are often bad, but even if they're bad in terms of tension, you kind of expect a degree of if not attacking quality, then at least organisational quality. But this was just...
One thing I will say, actually, because I've just seen the clip go up, Van de Ven's interception. I think that was... If you're looking for quality in the game, I do think Van de Ven displayed it.
But that's almost symbolic of where Tottenham are, that they're massively dependent on this, a sort of freak of a defender. He's incredibly big and incredibly quick. With hamstrings, he can't sustain that.
I should give one more positive to Tottenham. There's a lot of talk beforehand about missing Maddison, missing Kulusevski. Are they Spurs' two best players? Spurs' two best players are Van de Ven and Romero. And while it's easy, I don't want to undersell the achievement, and I do think that while this is a very weird Tottenham team, and most of the time it's a very bad Tottenham team, Romero and Van de Ven are brilliant players, and they have been absolutely integral to winning this competition.
And with that thought, I'm off for a 90-minute walk down the dual carriageway. Goodbye from Bilbao.
So that's the Bilbao Bureau. As I say, sorry for the sound quality, it's Wilson's fault. I don't know about you two, but I kind of watched that game thinking a variety of things, none of which were positive. But one of them that kept recurring to me was, we tend to assume that everybody is watching the Premier League all the time because of the kind of the role that it plays in our consciousness. But there must be lots of people across Europe who will maybe see the goals on social media, or they might, watch it in highlight form, but probably don't tune in as regularly as any of us do. In fact, I don't know if that's true of Horny. But they'll know the Premier League obviously is the dominant league in the world. That they'll see it as a byword for excellence. James, do you think there will be quite a lot of people in Italy who will have watched the Europa League final because it's the Europa League final, because it involved two big Premier League giants, and kind of found themselves thinking, "What's this?"
So they will have watched the UEFA Cup final because in Italy there's a kind of respect for all of these competitions. There's none of the debate that we hear in England, which is this Thursday, Sunday grind, isn't it a bit much? Or if you get in the Europa League and at the beginning, your team's suffering, fans seem to take it out on the Europa League by saying, well, we don't want to be in this competition anyway. And there's none of that in Italy. There's very much kind of, we want to be competitive in these competitions. We want to go all the way and try and win it. In fact, it was kind of felt as a mark of shame until last year when Atalanta beat Leverkusen in Dublin that they hadn't won that competition since Parma in sort of 1999, a competition that they used to dominate. They give it the full works. I was watching Sky Italia's coverage last night. They had, Beppe Bergomi in there. And they have this reverence for English football as not only kind of the inventors of the game, but also they hold up the Premier League as a mirror to everything that they see as flaws in their own game. And it's usually about what Miguel Delaney would call the financialization of football.
Don't you start using it.
Stop
Don't
it.
you start saying it.
Which they see as a positive because it's enriched the clubs and allowed them to basically invest in their teams, and their teams are more competitive. It's allowed them to invest in their infrastructure. And so the stadiums are, they always call them an astronave, there's a spaceship, the Tottenham Stadium. Look at that. Wow, it's from another world. And there's also this kind of feeling that English fans, which this is interesting coming up to like the 40th anniversary of Heysel next week, the feeling that English football addressed problems it had with its fans in the kind of 80s. And now going to a stadium in England is as it should be, this kind of wonderful family atmosphere, which, to be honest, I think Italians, if they don't have a grasp of English, they don't hear us singing, the referees are, all this kind of stuff. So they watched it last night as this kind of, well, of course it's an all English final. This is, in some respects, what we expect from the Premier League now.
Is there any resentment?
No, there's no resentment. There's no resentment. They come from a very humble place, I would say, which surprises me. This isn't the case of just the last couple of years. This is for much of my time following, sort of Italian football. Even Fabio Capello, for example, when he was England manager, Roberto Mancini when he was Man City manager, they would all say, you just live the game and experience the game differently in England. They make a lot of, for example, the glass of wine after the game. You would never do that in Italy with anyone, even though they have the best wines. It's just like the idea that you would spend time with your opponent after the game. These Corinthian values, they're just, for Italians, they're like, well, we don't experience that. And so I remember when Mancini came back for his second spell at Inter, it felt like after 6 weeks he regretted it. He said, look, I've regressed as a man. I'm getting involved in these touchline spats because of the atmosphere around me. In England, I was never like this.
You never did that at all. No.
But it's so that was, I suppose, their approach to the competition, their approach to an all-English final, and approach to the Premier League. When they actually then sat down and analysed the game...
What did Beppe say?
Beppe was mainly talking about how heavy the UEFA Cup is. Having played in an Inter team that reached 3 finals in the 90s, he was like, Riccardo Ferri could lift it with one arm. I needed 2. And they did a great analysis of Son lifting the trophy because he seemed to go too far at one stage, and they thought maybe he was going to go all the way back.
Isn't it a different trophy?
It's still the same. It's a gorgeous trophy. It
was the vase, yeah.
I think one of the worst aspects of the financialization of football, I can't even say it because it's not even a word. Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president, should know better because, he is the son of Italian immigrants. For a long time, the best trophies in world football were designed by an Italian.
The guys in Milan, yeah.
Yeah, Gazzaniga. I think it's Gazzaniga, I think.
Yeah, he's not the goalkeeper. I've been to his factory. I assume you have too.
I haven't, but I think I've read your piece on this. The interesting thing is Infantino has just decided to take trophies away from Italy and given them to a very well-known American jeweler, who, if they want to sponsor us, by all means, Tiffany's, come and sponsor Libero. We all have wives, and it would be good to get them gifts. But I mean, again, like, Infantino, show some respect to Italian, silverware. Craftsmanship, yeah. So they were attentive to that, Rory, to go back to the...
That is amazing that we think of Italy... there's this perception that the terrible English media never asks, like, detailed, tactical questions, that elsewhere it's much better. It's a much kind of higher level, more sophisticated form. Just like with food and wine and culture. They're just better than us in Europe. And then you've got Beppe Bergami going, it's very heavy. It's really heavy. Let's do an analysis run on how heavy it is.
That's sort of Steve McManaman level of analysis, isn't
it?
Maybe
still higher than Rio. John, did you think that game on Wednesday night, the Europa League final, was surprisingly bad?
I don't think anyone was surprised that those two teams played badly. What I was going to say, actually, is, as we've discussed, I was in Germany at the weekend. It's the English FA Cup, and you think, this... Remember, as children, the whole world is watching this. You try and get the FA Cup final on in Leipzig after an RB Leipzig game, and you will struggle. So, it's quite interesting, that idea of the Premier League in Germany and Holland as well, when I've been in the Netherlands. They don't care. The Premier League is, and funny enough, the discussions I had with a couple of people, it's like, your league, it is that financialization, that's how we say it.
That word is featuring much more than I wanted it to feature.
It's funny enough, I bought some souvenirs, and deliberately so, to provoke a couple of German friends, I bought a couple of RB Leipzig T-shirts. They were just, how dare you do this? This club does not, and very tasteful T-shirts, actually, but, very comfortable. But it's like this idea that the Premier League is this, over-leveraged, beast of finance, compared to the pure German league in which BMW, Audi, Bayer, the company that made SAP, that are all invested in it. It's all, football has its investors. Some of these people you really don't wish to know about, and it's the same in whichever country you're in, really, isn't it? But as regards that as an advert for English football across Europe, well, it wasn't great, was it? Because we had this purported man of principles, Ange Postecoglou, play like Libero favourite Chris Wilder, and
friend of the podcast,
Chris Wilder, and we also had United with this constipated system that Amorim is wedded to, and it appears wedded to, and getting out of that, getting divorced from that is obviously going to cost him a lot of money. Whatever it is, it's United were absolutely terrible from the very start. Didn't get much better, and were reduced to smashing it up to former Sheffield United defender Harry Maguire, and that was it. I mean, it's just, and it was awful football. I'm a great occasion by the sounds of it. If you're a Tottenham fan, some of the United fans seem to have enjoyed themselves, but it was poor. It was what we expected, which is one of those things that, because we work in journalism, the narratives are, will Ange Postecoglou survive? Will Amorim survive? And we move on to the next stage of it, don't we? But if you were an outsider looking in, you'd think, I mean, I remember going to a Portuguese final, maybe you were there, Rory, 11 in Dublin.
Yeah, I wasn't there, but I remember it well. It was awful.
Braga, Porto.
Yeah.
Dreadful. There's been, it's been a couple of all Spanish affairs as well that have not really taken off. That's it's a Miguel thing, isn't it? All country fairs tend to be quite poor.
I believe he said on the last episode of Libero that effectively it shouldn't be allowed. Like, Miguel Delaney's decree is that finals should always be between teams from different countries.
I mean, I can't speak for the 72 Wolves v Tottenham, what that was like over. Probably quite a good game over two legs. Maybe the two-legged final needs to come back for the Europa League or something like that.
It would be a sort of, yeah. If you actually, I'm in the middle of writing a book, like a coffee table book for the good people at Classic Football Kits.
Yes.
And I was watching the Europa League final, and it was interesting, especially in the Spurs end, United as well. I think loads and loads of retro shirts. That there is this thing now where fans will generally go in the shirts that mean the most to them, and I think it's I think it's a genuinely fascinating phenomenon.
So mine would be the 85 one with a badge in the middle.
Yeah, which is very much a classic of the genre. Mine would be the 1988 candy grey flecky Liverpool away shirt. That's the one that I hold.
James's here would be the all Tiger Hull City.
The bonus, the bonus electricals. Local East Yorkshire firm.
Again, if they want to sponsor us, fine. But I do think it's interesting that game, and you can forgive them, John. You're right. For it's a final, the nerves kick in, the stakes were really high. Like I think even in all the kind of preview stuff, of which there was obviously a lot, like it felt to me like a lot of the stakes were almost underplayed because it was kind of an existential game for both managers. I think that the consequences of what defeat might lead to for both clubs were really severe. But even by that standard, I said this, I did a Men in Blazers live thing immediately afterwards, and I've used this line already. So if there is anyone in the middle of the Venn diagram, I apologise. But I've been reading Harry Potter to my son over the last 18 months. We're midway through the 5th book, which is enormous, really bloated, very egotistical, that book. A lot of weird views in it, but there's
Let's not go there, please.
What you realise as you read through Harry Potter as an adult is these are books for kids, probably kids ideally a little bit older than my little boy, but there's a lot of murder. There's an awful lot of murder in Harry Potter. And again, I don't know why, I watched the Europa League final with my son, and you're watching Ruben Amorim, who came in as this kind of coaching wunderkind, and he was a wizard, wasn't he? He was magical Ruben Amorim. He was going to kind of transform Manchester United with his modern tactics. And there's an awful lot of lumping the ball up to Harry Maguire in this coaching wunderkind's playbook. Happens almost every time I watch Manchester United, and I do think it was one of those moments where, even allowing for the fact it was a final, it did kind of expose this idea that, for as much as we say it, as much as the Sky propaganda has kind of entered the bloodstream, like that idea that the Premier League is the best league in the world, I think probably needs to be challenged a little bit more, at least in terms of how we're defining best. Because James Horncastle, and I don't know if you know anything about Italian football, James, but
I'm from Hull.
There is a lead out there which does seem to have quite a lot of the ingredients that we demand of the Premier League. That does. It's interesting to say about the Italians use the Premier League to reflect back the flaws in Italian football. I think you can do the same thing. You can look at Serie A. So we're recording this the day before what I think they are calling, or certainly it was on the front page of Gazzetta the other day, Venerdì Pazzo dello Scudetto, the Mad Friday of the Championship. They've brought Napoli. So Napoli are a point ahead of Inter.
They're comparing it to the Friday before Christmas, when everyone gets pissed. That
is the vibe. So Napoli and Inter have both, and James will correct me on this. They've both spent the last month trying not to win the title. They're determined to blow it. Napoli managed to draw 0-0 with Parma last Sunday, as Inter twice took the lead against Lazio and twice threw it away. So going into the last game, Napoli are a point ahead of Inter. Serie A have brought both games forward to Friday night because, and James Horncastle, you informed me of this on the radio on Monday, because they need to be able to fit in a potential playoff, because it will go. That's the tiebreaker in Italy, is they will play each other if they finish level on points. I think the combination of results that is required for that to happen is very unlikely, but they need to have that possibility with Inter in the Champions League final. So they've brought the games forward to Friday. I'm guessing they think they'll play the playoff on like Monday or something. But you've also got this sort of pack of teams going for the Champions League. You've got a pack of teams who can qualify for Europe. There's real variety in there. So you get, I think Atalanta and Roma are both in contention this year, but next year it might be Lazio and Fiorentina. You have what looks to me like a relatively good relegation battle most years. So, James, is there a way in which you could define Serie A as the best league in Europe?
So, when it comes to defining best, I think a lot of people immediately leap and say, well, what about quality? Are you really saying that Serie A has more quality than the Premier League? And, we've talked about this on other podcasts about how I think people just assume that the wealthier a league is, the better it is because it's able to attract more quality and that sort of thing. Now, we can get into how that wealth, how that money is spent. But from a viewer's point of view, and I'm not saying this because, I've sort of made a life of kind of following Italian football, but what do we want as football fans when we are watching a league? We ultimately want something that is engaging, where there is still something at stake going into the very end of the season. And you want plurality as well. And you just touched upon this, Rory. So, in the last 5 years, there have been 4 different champions. We can get into why that might be. And then in 2 of the last 3 seasons, the title has gone down to the final day. And not just the title. We're talking about 4th place, for example, at the weekend. The final Champions League spot will be decided. It could go to one of 3 teams, Juventus, Roma, or Lazio. Likewise, with relegation, that is still up in the air. So for that to happen in 2 of the last 3 seasons, I think that's quite special. That keeps people engaged and that plurality where, after Juventus winning for 9 straight years, you have Juventus, Inter, Milan, Napoli, Inter. That belief that your team can win the league, which I think in certainly in England over the last 5 years, we've kind of lost that with that Man City dominance. Obviously Liverpool have won this year, but I think you could see going into this season, there was a real Man City fatigue, leaving aside the controversies around Man City. So, from my point of view, if you don't know who's going to win the title right until the end, if there are multiple different teams that give the impression they can win a title, and some of those teams, by the way, in that 5-year period have not won the title. I'm talking about Atalanta. Atalanta have got to the late 70s in terms of points, early 80s. They've scored more than 100 goals. People have often said, Atalanta, you can win the league. I don't think there's a group of fans of a league that wouldn't want that, right? Or wouldn't associate the spectacle or the entertainment that jeopardy provides with quality, regardless of what you think of the quality of player or the quality of manager on the show, which again is something we can debate.
John, I think that's right. I think that there's a tendency to say. So my view on it really is basically that it's the league that people care most about, that they assume is the best, and basically because the Premier League is in English, more people care about the Premier League than any other league. That it's the one that has been able to kind of make furthest inroads in the US and Australia. English is the lingua franca around huge sections of the world. I'm fascinated, and I actually don't know the answer to this, to what extent South Americans view the Premier League as being this hegemon, whether they think that's justified or whether there is still a sort of tendency to look at Spain, and maybe not Portugal, but Spain in particular, as dominant as they have Real Madrid and Barcelona. I always think that seems to be the thing we get confused by. We're mixing up what matters most to us and what is the best. Because I think to an extent the quality is, I'm not sure that's an ingredient, just as you can have a great game between two, you didn't in Bilbao, but you can take 2 really bad teams and have a great game and have a really thrilling. Inter Barcelona is a great example of this. They're 2 massively flawed teams, 2 insanely good games. What is quality, the technical quality of the players, of the teams, should that be the deciding factor in what is necessarily what is the best league? Just best is a wide, all-encompassing thing, right?
When was the first time that we decided that there had to be a best league in the world? And that was probably 1980s, 1990s, when Serie A was the best league in the world in terms of quality, in terms of the stars that went there, once the foreign ruling was opened a bit more. And you also had at this time, in this country, you would have the town criers of the day, the Keys and Grey, that would say this is the best league in the world. Yeah, because
I'm just picturing Richard Keys in like a giant red ermine
oh yeah,
coat.
oh yeah. I mean, it's yeah, and that's and those and funny enough because they had to sell this product for Rupert Murdoch, whatever, and they sold it as like, well, you've got Serie A, where you've got Beppe Signori, you've got all these stars. Every team had a star. Like if you were a schoolboy at that time, which we all were, every team, like Brescia had Harji or whatever. It was just incredible that every team would have this mega star. So you've got to sell the Premier League or the Premiership or whatever it was at the time.
The Barclays.
And the Carling. You have to sell it. But he said, they've got all these stars, but it's not as exciting as this. And it's not as exciting as QPR v Oldham on Monday night. Pew! That's when we got into this debate, didn't we? And there's a point possibly in the 1970s when Germany had Mönchengladbach and Bayern, and there was Feyenoord and Ajax in the Dutch league. So you have this idea, but that best league thing, and also one thing you find now is that when I watch Serie A football, I often think there's that guy that used to play in the Premier League that was, and particularly in Inter, you have Mkhitaryan, you have Darmian, who I've seen play for Manchester United, be rejected by Manchester United, having known that Mkhitaryan was the best player in the Bundesliga, came to Manchester United, disappeared, was at Arsenal for a bit. I've seen him play for Inter Milan. He's still brilliant. He's still a fantastic player. He's a repurposed player because he plays that, he no longer has the speed, but he has such a canny ability in midfield, can thread a pass. He has experience. And what I do think about Serie A is what I do enjoy is that it gives the oldsters a chance. And if you've still got that ability to play, the Premier League is pretty careless with its players, isn't it? You see that Luis Diaz, who I think has been a fairly decent player for Liverpool, let's get rid of him. I mean, it's cutthroat, isn't it? I was at Sellers Park the other night, and we had this big send-off for Joel Ward. Now, greatest respect, Joel Ward could come and knock on my door now, and I wouldn't know it was Joel Ward. But, because he's Joel Ward, he's just a normal guy playing football. This big celebration of him, probably because he is Joel Ward, because footballers don't last that long, which is why we get into this Trent debate of loyalty and stuff when we all know loyalty cuts one way. And I just think the Premier League is careless with its players. Perhaps Serie A is as well. But to me, Serie A is this treasure trove of players that you've read about and are interesting, that are doing interesting things. Yeah, as James said, whenever I'd look towards the end of the season and I'm working on the Guardian desk or whatever, Serie A, it's like, can Roma make the top six, can do this, and it seems much more exciting than what the Premier League's been. That idea of 4 or 5 teams being able to win the title, we haven't had that since the early 90s when Liverpool fell. We haven't had that. It's only been Man United plus another, and the Premier League has not had that particular excitement. And other leagues, Germany, France, they're dominated. Serie A is much more open, isn't it?
Well, even if you look at Napoli, I think, and Naples is James's one big blind spot in Italy. Just can't quite crack Napoli. The Napoli. I am Napoli's favoured British journalist.
Right.
Nicola Lombardo, the head of comms there, who used to be a restaurateur in York, if I'm not mistaken.
He did live in York.
I'm confusing that with my passion for Italian football, which came from actually going to an Italian restaurant in Hull where the guy lived in York. That's what I'm conflating here.
Hang on, what?
Yeah, so I used to go every Friday night with my parents to an Italian restaurant called Operetta on Bond Street in Hull, not London. Bond Street in Hull. Okay,
Is it similar to Bond Street in London?
Well, no, because there was a derelict building opposite it, which remained derelict for about 25 years, and had. I'm trying to think of what the graffiti looked like. It looked like one of those 1980s Total Recall kind of graffiti of like a bald head that comes out of a man's neck. Yes, that's it. Yeah. Nice. Thanks, John. And anyway, the guy who used to run that was a guy from Bari who, typical of people from Bari, supported Juventus. Not trying to offend any fellow Baresi people who are listening, but yeah, some people from the south do like to support Juventus. And there would be Juventus shirts kind of hung up. There was a candle that was made in the shape of the World Cup. And there was a wonderful kind of montage from the 1994 World Cup of two Italian icons, so Pavarotti and Roberto Baggio, and then Dunga and Romario. And you could just eat a lot of really nice Pugliese food, where Puglia has really become a thing for people in the UK now. They want to go to Puglia. But at that time, a man from Puglia left Puglia to come and work in Hull, which now people would say, what on earth would you do that for?
People would describe that as a poor choice.
And he has since closed his restaurant. But it was a very fun mix of authentic Italian Pugliese food, orecchiette alla baresi, and having to cater for the theatre crowd in Hull, who were like, where's the cod? Where's the fish? Where's the halibut?
So was it the Hull Truck Company? Was it that type of thing?
Hull Truck was Hull Truck was sort of on the opposite side of town. There was the new theatre nearby, still is.
It's quite an arty town, Hull, that's the thing. People don't realise this.
Yeah, no, it is. Philip Larkin.
Robin Gristle.
Andrew Marvel. I could keep going.
Hull,
if you want Visit Hull to be our sponsor, there we are.
Visit Hull do not have an advertising budget. Move on.
Yeah.
Well, it was a capital of culture. So
it was.
But to get back to Rory's point, we've digressed here because we were talking about how Napoli's head of comms prefers Rory to me.
No. But I want to know I want to know the end of the James Horncastle origin story. So you go to a restaurant where the guy's a big Juve fan, despite being from Bari, my Italian team. And was it the redolent glamour that made you think, that opened your eyes? Because I think that sounds like a much more personal version of what happened to an entire generation, really, of English fans, which was we watched James Richardson and Gazzetta and the games on a Sunday afternoon on Channel 4 and thought, this is much brighter, it's much sexier, these players are better, it seems to mean more. Was that what happened to you in Operetta in Hull?
So the guy who ran this restaurant was called, I think, Nicola Tragni. But everyone in Hull, because people from Hull have a way of saying they would call him Nicola. So Nicola, as my mum and dad would call him, was the classic kind of miserable Italian who I would go in there and I would see a kind of Juventus shirt and I would see all this kind of other paraphernalia from Italy, football related. And so I'd be curious and I'd ask him about it. And he would give the kind of, it's all fixed, It's just, I'm like, well, no, Nico. I mean, it's great. Best players play there. Still, when I was growing up, obviously 90s, early 2000s, it was still the best league in the world. All the best players played there. And he was even at that time was like, nah, you can't believe what you're seeing, James. It was like going and sitting on like Santa's knee and then Santa saying, I don't exist. I was like, oh, thanks.
So was this the time of Sven being denied the title with the Lazio one, and is it all that type of thing?
He was just speaking generally.
Right, okay.
This would be like certainly after 1998, the kind of Scudetto del Veleno, the kind of poisonous, toxic Scudetto with the Ronaldo Giuliano kind of, is it a penalty, isn't it a penalty, blah, blah, blah. It's certainly around that. But
see, I remember that game. I remember watching that game.
Mm.
And that's 1998, so I'd have been 15, 16. So I should probably have been revising for my GCSE. Shit. But that game was a massive... And John, you must remember this as well. That game was a massive event. Like,
yeah.
We were super conscious. Like, people were talking about it at school. Like, it's into Juve this weekend. It was this huge showdown. Ronaldo was the kind of final... that he was the final star who came, and it was a bit like, this guy is... You'd never seen anyone play football like Ronaldo. That was not what...
Well, he went for the fact he went from Spain to Italy. That would show you the direction of travel at that time, wasn't it? You couldn't, even Barcelona could not keep this guy. He went to Inter Milan.
You could have made a case at that point, certainly, that Inter were the biggest club in the world.
Yeah.
I think.
Had about 85 world-class strikers.
Yeah, this ridiculous. And then they had things like Zamorano wearing the 1+8 on the back of his shirt, and it felt like such a huge event even here. And I guess it's hard to express when we're so used to being able to consume whatever football we like, even if we have to have multiple subscriptions to do it. But for domestic Italian football, which had been on TV at that stage for 6 years in England, you are talking like peak Premier League years. Like that is you're getting into prime Barclays there. Wenger's here. Arsenal would have been going for the double. Like Henri's arrived. I think maybe Vieira, not quite, but you're talking about the Premier League as we kind of conceive it. And there was no question that season the biggest game in the world was Inter against Juve. Like it was an enormous event, which in itself I think is quite instructive. Do you think, James, that to an extent the reason that we tend to be dismissive of Serie A is partly so the two? I think there's two things going on, and I would love both of your perspectives. One is there was an innate. The Premier League was set up as a rival to Serie A to an extent that a lot of that Keys and Gray shtick and spiel was, I don't watch that foreign rubbish, that's Serie A, it's terrible, it's defensive, cautious.
It's sort of a Berlusconi model. It's following a Berlusconi model as well, wasn't it?
It was the idea, yeah.
Yeah.
But also that there's an element of Serie A is haunted by its ghosts, that there is part of us, and we can recognise that it is not what it was.
Yeah, I think certainly externally that is true. I think a couple of things, how Serie A was kind of squeezed out and was off our screens. Our colleague James Richardson, I think, will never forget that the last broadcast of a Sunday game in Serie A on Channel 4. So, it was on terrestrial TV. It was much easier to access when Sky, for example, had the Premier League and you had to have a Sky subscription to watch the Premier League. That last game was the final game of the 2000-2001 season when Roma won the league for the first time since 1983. And it was Roma-Parma. Totti scored, Roma won, and Channel 4 cut away, I think before the game finished, to go to something else. And that was
Big Brother.
Okay, that was almost kind of like, okay, this is no longer important to you. And then everyone had nostalgia for that coverage, and then it flipped around from sort of Bravo to Setanta to ESPN.
Bit of Channel 5.
Channel 5.
Chappers did it, didn't he?
Laura Esposito.
Laura Esposito.
Wow.
I feel like there should have been more Laura Esposito on our TVs.
I think there was quite a bit of it.
But and then I think what happens in that 2001-2006 period is that 2006 Calciopoli happens, and Calciopoli I do think had a dramatic impact on perception of Serie A. All of the things that the chef and the restaurateur operator told me, he would say, "See, I've told you so," even though it was more complicated than that. But recovering from Calciopoli, recovering credibility from that, and also the financial detriment that had on the league, its ability to go and sell itself, was really, really tough. I think a lot of Andrea Agnelli's mindset when Andrea Agnelli became chairman of Juventus in 2010 was, and for example, his advocacy for a Super League was because of the amount of ground Juventus had lost in that period between Calciopoli and when he came to power, essentially. In that Juventus, if you look at the Deloitte Money League around that time, this is a sidetrack, but Deloitte Money, they were like top 3 in the world. And then all of a sudden they're scrabbling around to be top 10. And, everyone has this kind of misconception about Juventus being really rich because the Agnellis would just open up their wallets. But Juventus in the 90s, what did people always remark about Juventus, apart from them reaching 3 Champions League finals in a row? It's like they sell their best players every year. They sell Vialli to Chelsea, they sell Ravanelli to Middlesbrough, they sell Vieri to Atletico Madrid. And it's because Juventus were always run as a kind of extension of the family business where the accounts were looked at every year. And so there was that. And then you had the fact that no one was investing in infrastructure. What I think we all loved about Inter in the 90s was Massimo Moratti, the owner, would just say, Ronaldo, he's got a buyout clause. It would take a world record fee. Who cares? Here's the check. Alvaro Recoba, Yuri Djorkaeff. I don't know where these players would fit in. I want them anyway.
Yeah, Massimo Moratti was not a big PSR guy.
No. And then you had Berlusconi, and Berlusconi. There are two ways of looking at him. I think he's the great modernizer in European football history. And he's also a sugar daddy who basically said, Adriano Galliani, who's on the Ballon d'Or shortlist year and who's not on our team. Whoever's not on our team and is on that Ballon d'Or shortlist, I'm going to sign them. Jean-Pierre Papin doesn't fit in, but I'm going to sign them.
Yeah.
And so they would break world transfer records, spend huge numbers on salaries, when what they should have been doing, and this is what the Premier League and Richard Scudamore were very good at, was basically, guys, we're going to go out and sell this league around the world, even though all the best players in Serie A. We're going to plant our flagpole in Nepal. So if you're in a Nepalese bar whilst you're kind of scaling, the Everest, you can find a Premier League game to watch instead of watching Serie A. And that money we're going to give you, it'd be great if you could invest it in infrastructure and things that is going to help you make your own revenue. And so Premier League football clubs are far more self-sustainable. Serie A clubs were never self-sustainable because they were reliant on daddy, daddy putting their hand in their pocket. And so when Berlusconi and Moratti basically said, we can't compete anymore with PSG, and PSG replaced Inter and Milan in the European football context.
Well, and Roman Abramovich as well was sort of a big crasher of the system, wasn't he?
Yeah, but Leonardo was very much the inside man here because Leonardo had been kind of sporting director executive with Galliani at Milan. He then went to coach Inter, and then PSG said, "Can you come back to PSG?" Because that's where he'd played, and he was like, "Sure." I know where you Qataris can spend your money. Let's go and get Zlatan. Let's go and get Cavani. Let's go get Lavezzi. Let's go get Pastore. These are all players that in the past AC Milan and Inter would have signed, and PSG replaced them. And that period, I would say, between 2010, so when Inter won the treble, to maybe only 3 or 4 years ago, the two biggest clubs, along with Juventus, the shining lights of the Serie A brand, were in the wilderness. Really, they were lost. And
but when
I was going to say actually that the Champions League, it's the 15th. We are speaking on the 15th anniversary of that Inter Bayern, and so that's a significant amount of time, isn't it?
Yeah, and John, people, I covered that season, and no one expected Inter to win the league, win the Champions League that year.
What was the striker called? Diego
Milito.
I mean, that just a season of all seasons. To score the winner in every league decider.
That triumph was really seen as a exception. And again, like Mourinho's sort of genius, really part of his mythology, because that team was dominant in the league but couldn't win in Europe, couldn't get close to winning in Europe. And even the year before, had gone out to Man United in the round of 16, I think, or quarterfinals. And so even at that stage, people were looking at Serie A and saying, it's in decline, clubs aren't competitive anymore, look how old and slow these teams are. Which, again, we can get into some stereotypes about Serie A another time, about what does intensity mean to the Premier League, to La Liga, to Serie A. It's all different things, right? But certainly in 2010, people looked at that team and thought, old, slow, no chance of going far in this competition, and they did it. So my point there is, it was an aberration, a complete exception, and so that gap between the perception of Italian football being competitive probably ended in 2007 when
Milan won. Yeah.
I think the point you made about the stadiums is really interesting, because to get us back to that subject of the best league, and I think we should probably acknowledge here that it's a completely stupid conversation, and we are only having it, as John kind of alludes to, because the Premier League set itself up as a kind of anti-Serie A to try and stake a claim to. It was initially the most competitive league in the world, that was the spiel, and then it became the best. And I think most people now accept that. It's certainly the richest, it's where the greatest weight of the top players in the world are. I think Spurs against Manchester United in the Europa League final is a valid kind of counterweight to that argument. But I think
it
what you
shows
can't...
the wastefulness of it as well, because
It does.
It's actually, when you look at the big talents of the, say, I've got to write a Champions League team of the season, there won't be many Premier League players in there, because not a lot of the most talented players do remain in the Madrids or the Barcelonas or the Serie A. It's English football signs a certain type of player, doesn't it? But power, speed, all that type of thing.
But what it does better than anybody by a mile is present itself as a television product, and that's where the stadium infrastructure, I think, is crucial. The Premier League looks amazing, and to go back to Nicola Lombardo, my friend at Napoli, the big thing with Napoli, I always think with the stadium, the San Paolo, the Diego Armando Maradona, whatever you want to call it, is that they quite often, until relatively recently, the bottom tier would be empty.
Yeah.
And I think that's because it's quite dangerous to sit there, just if the ultras decide they want to chuck some stuff. That's what's happening to you at the football. But it means that and you see it at the Olimpico in Rome as well, and the Artemio Franchi, which is one of my favourite stadiums in Florence. It just looks bad on TV, whereas the Premier League is really good at looking like it's important, looking like it matters, looking like it means something. And the great example of that, and I don't know if this is apocryphal, it's one of those things that I've said so often that it might just be a lie.
Is it the financialization of football?
It's not about it's about the microphoneization of football. Apparently the Premier League's pitchside mics were the first to face towards the crowd and not onto the pitch. That the Premier League realised that what we're watching for is the spectacle rather than the sport. Whereas in Italy, until relatively recently, and it was Serie A where they were the first to have those like Ultra 4K HD cameras, weren't they? That they exclusively use for pictures of people taking corners, or managers. So you'll have that the game will be happening, and then suddenly you'll get this crystal clear shot of a manager like spitting. And you sort of think, I'm not sure that's the best use of that technology, really, lads. To be fair, do we need that in HD? But the Premier League made that realization. The Premier League, I think, a lot of the time, the technical, tactical, like differences between the leagues are much smaller than we think. I think, and they vary. They vary from year to year. You'll get years where actually there's loads of good teams in La Liga, and years when there's loads of good teams in the Bundesliga. I think entertainment is so subjective that it can't possibly be a measure, and it's related basically to the league that your team is in. So if you're an AC Milan fan, the one you'll be most entertained by is Serie A, because that's the one that means the most to you. But I think where the Premier League has been able to kind of establish that superiority, and it's why Bilbao kind of cast it into such sharp relief, is that it kind of shows that what you're actually selling is a TV product. You're not selling anything. Like all the rest of it doesn't really make any difference. It's, does this look good on TV? And the Premier League undeniably looks much better on TV than all of the other leagues.
When I used to watch the Serie A roundup, the Saturday morning thing, when they show the roundup of goals, the goal celebration behind the goal would just be that, 200 blokes running down a terrace together. It looked, the famous Gaza goal against Roma, where he jumps over a moat and people run towards him. It looked completely unsafe, but it looked insane. It looked so exotic. And I suppose you're probably right, is that the Premier League sells itself as this great atmosphere, but it doesn't have that atmosphere. It has, but as you say, it's slightly fine-tuned towards having a great atmosphere and pointing the mics and making it sound perhaps better than it often is.
Andrea Agnelli, again, to go back to him, I'm quite sympathetic to Andrea Agnelli. We'll have to do a podcast about him another day, but he understood exactly what Rory is saying, which is, that Juventus stadium, it's too small, effectively, for the biggest club in Italy. I know that Milan and Inter fans will come at me for that, but the census shows that Juventus are still the biggest club in Italy. And it's too small. But he was very aware of what it looked like on TV. He wanted that stadium to be sold out in every game, because if the stands are sold out, people at home thinking, "Oh, I wish I was there." Wow, that it creates a kind of
exclusivity thing. Yeah,
I want to go to a Juventus game, and then the other thing to sort of come back to this best argument, I suppose. I mean, you don't need sort of De Niro and Al Pacino in every film for it to be a great film, do you? You know, you can, Parasite can win an Academy Award. Even though most people watching that don't speak Korean, they're just like, that's just a great film. I really enjoyed it. And so I do think our way of looking at the Premier League, I actually push back on the idea that it's got the best players in the world, and it's got a lot of really good players, but like the absolute best of the best. And this, I don't want to have another Trent argument, but no one leaves Real Madrid to go to Liverpool. No one leaves Real Madrid to go to Man United. Yeah, the opposite happens. The best players still play for Real Madrid and Barcelona. And then I think the stars of the Premier League are not only the kind of, sort of product that we see, which is, these lovely looking stadiums with, smiling families in them and all that sort of thing, lovely green pitches and, sort of great color schemes and that sort of thing. It's the managers of the stars of the Premier League. I just, Erling Haaland is a very good player, but he's Norwegian, and there's kind of a limiting factor in that. Kevin De Bruyne is a strawberry blonde playmaker who is very fondly regarded in Manchester, and in the Premier League is considered one of the all-time great Premier League players. But outside the Premier League, his recognition does not get close to what it is within the Premier League. Now, I suspect that's close to what Rory's argument is about, the Premier League means more to the people who follow the Premier League than people who are following other leagues. But I do think, we don't have a galaxy of the absolute superstars of world football playing in the Premier League. And I hate to, it's just, whilst John was talking, I was collating the number of players in the Man United Tottenham game who have been signed from Serie A to maybe explain the spectacle.
Yes.
Is it Italian football's fault, James?
So I don't think it is, but Bentancur, Vicario, Udogie, Romero, Højlund, Zirkzee, Dorgu. Now,
Tottenham have got the better of those, I think, don't you?
Those players, John, for sort of Bentancur, Vicario, Udogie, even Kulusevski wasn't playing last night because he was injured. They were signed from Juventus by a former Juventus sporting director,
Paratici, yeah,
who was come in to change the culture of Spurs and win something. He would say, "We've done that by winning something."
Long term, he's been proved right.
And then I would say the Højlund, Zirkzee, Dortmund guys are actually, and I tend to think this of Man United squad anyway. There are lots of really, really good players in that Man United squad. It's just unfortunate that they're caught in the black hole of Man United.
The Højlund debate is like this is sort of, is he the worst ever? No, he isn't. No, of course not. But it's the eye of the storm of the ever deepening misery around the club has just given him this reputation. Clearly, they saw something there, and we've seen signs of that player. But because of the Premier League hype, because journalists have to say something, because we're in an even more, the takes have to be even more piping hot. That's what we end up with. Like Zirkzee, even in the looks, has got something about him. Dorgu, well, you could see why he was signed, but it's not really worked out. It's not Serie A's fault at all. But the thing is, that's more to do with the fact that Man United can no longer mine the prime talent factories of Europe. You go to Manchester United, you're not going to Real Madrid, you're not going to, I suppose, even Arsenal or someone like that.
Rory, I don't know what you make of this, but if you look at United's transfer strategy, they went down this route of saying, okay, we're going to sign proven established players, Di Maria, Radamel Falcao, Cavani. And then they were like, well, that hasn't worked. So we need to sort of be smarter. So let's go and get the next sort of big thing. So let's get Zirkzee. Let's get Højlund. Okay, we'll overpay maybe for Højlund. But as much as you can say those signings have not worked out, well, was it not the kind of right strategy to say, okay, that thing hasn't worked. Let's go and get players who are young, upside, we can build around, who clearly got talents. And yeah, so they were doing the right thing, but that it's still led to the wrong outcome. That's my...
So, just people who are listening to this just in audio form won't realise this, but John's just taken a drink of water from the biggest glass I have ever seen. It's extremely distracting. Like a huge tankard, like a Viking tankard.
It's a Steiner, yeah.
John has just saluted town criers, Keys and Grey, outside the Red Lion.
Hear ye.
I've not shown you what I'm wearing yet. I'm off out to do. I am the Bethnal Green town crier here.
Yeah, I think it does make sense. The problem with United has always been, and I suppose that maybe that's what kind of the Europa League indicated. That's the thing that more than the states of the game or whatever, is that United have signed... I mean, Joshua Zirkzee was really good for Bologna. He was a really good player at Bologna. Højlund had shown some promise at Atalanta. It was too soon for Højlund. I think that was basically the problem, that United, I think, basically thought you needed to have a big Scandinavian up front, and he was the next in line. Maybe they worried... There was an element of like knee-jerk about it, that he'd had that good run for Atalanta, and suddenly they thought, okay, right, he might be a sensation, let's get in now. And there is an element of gamble there where you're overpaying in the moment, but it might look like a bargain in years to come. It looks like they might have got it wrong. I still think there's a player in Højlund that will... Rasmus Højlund's going to score 24 goals in 38 games for Everton at some point in his life, and everyone's going to be like, well, he's finally showing it, fulfilling his promise. Or do I think it's too soon to judge, but it's also unfair to take a 20-year-old kid straight from Lecce and throw him into Manchester United and expect him to perform immediately without any kind of transition period, or like acclimatization period. But the problem is that United's system is so muddled, and what they want their players to do is so uncertain and changes so frequently that it's impossible for... This is something I think all fans get wrong about everyone, just as I think the technical differences between leagues are much finer than we think they are. They're all really good footballers. All these players who you think are bad are far better at football than you can even really imagine. I've played occasionally with retired professionals. It's a different game. I'm all right as a Sunday League player. I'm not a bad Sunday League player. You have no idea how good. These were people who played League One. There's a guy I play with occasionally who played, I think, 100 times for Bradford. He's ridiculous. He's a ridiculously good footballer. And he was nowhere near good enough to make it to the levels that we're talking about. They are all amazing at football. You don't play for Lecce unless you're insanely good at football. And what kind of makes the difference at that elite level is whether you're put into the right context. And Manchester United have reliably for the last 13 years been the wrong context. And that's why everyone looks bad. It's why those players who leave quite often shine, and you think actually they're pretty good. Nusayr Mazraoui is a brilliant fullback. I remember watching him at Ajax and at Bayern. Mazraoui is a brilliant fullback, 2-footed, play either side, a lovely footballer to watch. Now looks awful, but it's because he's in a context that makes no sense for him. And I think that's what the Premier League does in a lot of cases, and United are a really pronounced one, is they do hoover up, and I think you're right, James, not the best players in the world necessarily, but this whole kind of class of talent between steps 1 and 3, say, in the hierarchy of ability. And they just jumble them together and assume that it's going to work. I don't think anything particularly inventive happens in the Premier League anymore, other than at that kind of Guardiola Klopp level where you're working with such resources that you can basically do whatever you like. I think if you look in Serie A, in La Liga, in the Bundesliga, and to an extent in France, you see people, and John will take the piss out of me for saying this, but that idea of there are teams doing interesting things. It's because they have to, and that's what makes those leagues curious, and it's what gives those leagues, I guess, a little bit of that fluidity, whereby you will get teams who are suddenly very good because they've got a manager who's got an idea, and that idea works and happens to fit the players that have been gathered for him, and they will always be flawed. And I deeply resent the ongoing Libero joke about Bodo Glimt, but the players will be flawed because they have to be flawed because they're not working with unlimited budgets. But something curious and quite cruel will come of it, and it will be fleeting and it won't last, but it's worth watching at the time. And I think that's what you maybe get in those leagues that you can't get as much in the Premier League, where everyone can solve their problems with money.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we close this out, what interesting things I've seen in the last week. Magdeburg goalkeeper Dominic Ryman, who plays in centre midfield when he's not playing in goal. That is an interesting thing.
That counts as an interesting thing.
That is very interesting. They were playing Fortuna Dusseldorf, who didn't seem to notice that you could lob the keeper if you were in midfield. It was just, but yeah, I mean, when you have like player yardage, he must have smashed it that day. It was incredible.
John, are you spending the rest of the afternoon putting a YouTube compilation of this goal?
Dominic Ryman, Tricks and Skills 2025 HD. Do you think it would be inappropriate if a player called Ryman was stationary? I think that's the point at which we say that this episode of Libero is over. We've reached no conclusion. We never should. Thank you for listening. Thank you to John and to James for their time. Thank you to producer Tom, who is the captain who steers our ship. As pleaded for at the start, rate, review, like, smash that like button, whatever you do on the internet to get the word to other people. You can email us on liberopodcast0@gmail.com. I can only assume that the liberopodcast@gmail.com email address was taken. I don't know why it would be, but apparently it was. All correspondence is welcome. All correspondence is read. We share it in our WhatsApp group, and it means a lot. Thank you for your time. We'll be back next week.